Welcome to today's show. My name is John. As always, you can subscribe to the show on iTunes or follow the links to social media in the podcast show notes. So please subscribe when you're finished listening. You can also go to snarkymoviereviews.com to read notes, bios, and other random movie thoughts. Today's movie is 7 Days in May, 1964. This star-studded military movie doesn't feature any combat, but there is enough action for anyone as a rogue general tries to replace the U.S. president in a military coup. Every actor in this movie is amazing, but I want to specifically call out Edmund O'Brien, who played a drunken senator. Rod Serling wrote the screenplay, and the movie was directed by John Frankenheimer. So let's jump right into the actors, many of whom are show veterans. Actors. Burt Lancaster played General James Mattoon Scott. The great Burt Lancaster was covered in Episode 30, Birdman of Alcatraz, 1962. Kirk Douglas played Colonel Martin Jiggs Casey. Douglas was first covered in Episode 4, In Harm's Way, 1965. Frederick March played seemingly weak President Jordan Lyman. March was first covered in Episode 67, The Buccaneers, 1938. Edmund O'Brien was great as the permanently inebriated Senator Raymond Clark. O'Brien was covered in Episode 30, Birdman of Alcatraz, 1962. Martin Balsam played the President's aide, Paul Gerard. Balsam was covered in Episode 26, Time Limit, 1957. Hugh Marlowe played the role of Harold McPherson, TV demagogue. Marlowe was covered in Episode 28, World Without End, 1956. Whit Bissell played Senator Frank Prentice. Bissell was covered in Episode 30, Birdman of Alcatraz, 1962. John Houseman played Vice Admiral Farley C. Barneswell and was uncredited. Houseman always played a stodgy old Englishman, so I was very surprised to find out he was born in Romania in 1902. He was raised and educated in England. In 1925, he moved to New York City and began working in theater. He was also a founding member of the Mercury Theater. During the Great Depression, he worked for the Works Progress Administration financed Federal Theater Project. He was the producer of Cradle Will Rock with Orson Welles and known leftists Harry De Silva and Will Geer. Grandpa, say it ain't so. Tim Robbins directed a movie version, Cradle Will Rock 1999, which has more stars than I can name here, but it's really worth a watch. Houseman directed more plays and went to work for the U.S. government during World War II on The Voice of America. Following the war, he directed and produced Julius Caesar 1953, the one with Marlon Brando. He was a producer on a lot of films and television shows such as Lust for Life 1956, Executive Suite 1954, The Bad and the Beautiful 1952, Holiday for Sinners 1952, On Dangerous Ground 1951, They Lived by Night 1948, and The Blue Dahlia 1946. Houseman devoted much of his life to teaching and even helped form the acting school at the Juilliard School of the Arts. He played the stern law professor in The Paper Chase 1973 and won an Oscar. His talents were in high demand as a supporting actor. Houseman died in 1988 at the age of 86. Ava Gardner played the role of Eleanor Holbrook. Gardner was born in 1922 in the mighty metropolis of Grabtown, North Carolina. This hometown beauty gained a love of going barefoot, being raised on a tobacco farm. When Ava was 18, someone noticed a picture of her in her brother-in-law's photography studio. On the strength of just her looks, she was given a contract with MGM. Since Gardner had no previous acting experience, the first 17 films she made between 1942 and 1945 were one-liners and small parts. Ava was cast in Whistle Stop 1946, a B-movie drama with George Raft. Next, she was lent to Universal and starred in one of the best film noirs ever, The Killers 1946 with Burt Lancaster. Although she remained under contract to MGM for 17 years, a lot of her best work was when she was loaned out to other studios for movies like Magambo 1953 and Bwana Junction 1956. She made many quality movies such as The Sun Also Rises 1957 with an aging Errol Flynn, The Sci-Fi On the Beach 1959, 55 Days in Peking 1963, 7 Days in May 1964, and The Night of the Iguana 1964. Living in Europe, she made a few films just for the money, such as The Life and Times of Judge Roy Bean 1972, the disaster flick Earthquake 1974, and The Cassandra Crossing, 1976. This beautiful and talented actress died at the early age of 67 in 1990. Richard Anderson played the role of Colonel Murdoch. Anderson did some acting before his time in the Army. After he was discharged, he worked in summer stock and radio. He was eventually signed with MGM and was in some important movies such as Forbidden Planet 1956, Paths of Glory 1957, The Gunfight at Dodge City 1959, 7 Days in May 1964, and Tora 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 1970, which is much better than Pearl Harbor 2001. However, he was a strong television actor. He was a regular on The Last Year of Perry Mason 1959 and The Fugitive 1964-67. However, to most of us, he will always be Oscar from The $6 Million Man 1974-78 and on The Bionic Woman 1976-78. Anderson is currently alive at age 90. Story. The movie credits roll showing the Articles of the Constitution. Monday, May 12th. Two groups of picketers are outside the White House. One group is strongly against President Jordan Lyman, Frederick March, and the other is for peace and a non-atomic world. The former group is carrying the signs that say elect Chairman of the Joint Chief of Staff, 4-star Air Force General James Mattoon Scott, Burt Lancaster. If you need a mnemonic for general's rank, it is Be My Love General, which means 1-star Brigadier General, 2 stars Major General, 3 stars Lieutenant General, 4 stars just General, and 5 stars General of the Army. There will be a test later. One of the anti-Lyman protesters attacks the Peace on Earth sign, and a huge fight breaks out between the two groups. The Capitol Police have to come in and break it up. Inside of the White House, the president's popularity is shown to be 29%. His doctor is examining him, while his aide, Paul Gerard, Martin Balsam, is working. The president is trying to stop a nationwide strike. His doctor wants him to take a vacation, but the president says he will swim in the White House pool. Senator Raymond Clark, Democrat, Georgia, Edmund O'Brien comes in to join the president. They mention that the vice president is out of the country. Clark explains that the USA and the USSR will be dismantling their atomic bombs as a result of the treaty. Lyman explains why we must have the treaty so the world is not destroyed. He also advises the senator to lay off the booze. General Scott is testifying in front of a Senate committee. General Scott is explaining why the treaty is a bad idea when Senator Frederick Prentice, Republican California, Whit Bissell, and Senator Clark get into a verbal spat. General Scott is flanked by his two aides, Colonel Martin Jiggs Casey, United States Marine Corps, Kirk Douglas, and Colonel Murdoch, Richard Anderson. Jiggs is devoted to General Scott. On the way back to the Pentagon, General Scott tells Jiggs that no one on Capitol Hill or in the press corps must find out about the alert scheduled for Sunday, May 18th. The general says this one must be deep and dark right down the line. Back at the Pentagon, Jiggs receives a top-secret communication that was sent out early in the morning to key members of the U.S. military command, asking for their Preakness bets, the race that will be run on Sunday, May 18th. Of the major commanders that was sent the message, only Vice Admiral Farley C. Barneswell, United States Navy, John Houseman, Com 6th Fleet says he will not bet. Jiggs goes back into his office and finds Colonel William Mutt Henderson, Andrew Duggins, is waiting. When Jiggs asks where he is stationed, Mutt replies, "You know already. I'm exec at ECOMCON, Site Y." Jiggs is totally in the dark, but he gets more information out of Mutt. He finds out it's near El Paso and is commanded by Colonel John Broderick, John Larkin, who is in town to brief General Scott. Jiggs says Broderick is a bit of a Nazi. Jiggs also finds out that they have 100 officers and 3,600 enlisted men training for seizure and not protection. Colonel Murdoch comes in and warns Jiggs not to mention the alert. When Jiggs brings up the Preakness bet, Murdoch becomes very angry, saying it is the general's personal business. After Murdoch leaves, Jiggs calls the operator and asks if there is a listing for ECOMCON, and there is not. Later that night, Jiggs goes to a party. He is accosted by Gerard, who wants to know why the general was so high and mighty at the Senate hearing. Senator Prentice steps into the conversation and gives Jiggs some relief, but he gets drawn back in. Jiggs avoids answering questions about his personal feelings on the treaty. When Jiggs goes into the other room, he runs into the general's former mistress, Eleanor Ellie Holbrook Ava Gardner. She makes an odd foreshadowing comment for Jiggs to make sure the general rests on the 7th day. She is talking loud, and Jiggs takes her aside and calms her down, and tells her when she is sober she is great to have around. She then asks him to drive her home, and he agrees. Before he gets out of the party, Senator Prentice tells him he works for the only man that can get us out of this trouble, and he needs to stay alert, especially on Sunday. Jiggs has to dump Ellie to go to Fort Myers to see the general. When he gets there, he sees Senator Prentice going into the house. Tuesday, May 13th. When Jiggs comes into the office, Colonel Broderick is in with General Scott. When Broderick comes out, he starts goading Jiggs about his liberal views. Jiggs handles it and goes to see the general. Jiggs and the general go over film from the last alert, and the results are not good as everyone is moving too slow. The general lies to Jiggs about what time he went to bed. He tells Jiggs to stay close so they can meet after the general's meeting. The general also tells Jiggs not to mention the Preakness or the fact that Admiral Barnwell refused. Jiggs notices that the Navy was not included in the meeting. He picks up a crumpled piece of paper from Chief of Staff of the Air Force, General Hardesty, and it reads, Airlift ECOMCON 40 K212s to Site Y before 700 Sunday, Chi, New York, LA, Utah. Outside, Jiggs is flagged down by the ensign that told him about the Preakness. He is being transferred to Pearl Harbor, which he sees as a reward. The ensign says all of the other military leaders came through with their Preakness bets. General Scott travels to the television studio. Television host and real Sunshine patriot Harold McPherson, Hugh Marlowe, introduces General Scott, and everything goes like a political rally. Jiggs is shocked by what he sees on television. Although it hurts him, he calls the White House. Jiggs lays out the slight bit of evidence he has before the president. The nuclear football guy is always by the president. The president's aide, Gerard, is there as well. Jiggs says that ECOMCON might mean emergency communication control. General Scott has asked the president to watch the alert without press. Congress is in recess, and the vice president is out of the country. Jiggs has to say he thinks General Scott is planning a coup for Sunday, May 18th. Gerard does not believe it. When Jiggs leaves, they bring in Bill Condon from the Bureau of the Budget. The president assembles a team, like you should do when you're under attack, consisting of Art Corwin from Secret Service, Secretary of Treasury Chris Todd, George McCready, Senator Clark, and later Jiggs. Wednesday, May 14th. Todd doesn't believe it because no one authorized the funding. The president, because his hide is on the line, takes it a little more seriously. Art Corwin has to shadow the Joint Chiefs. Chris Todd will coordinate with the White House. Senator Clark will go to El Paso to find the base. Gerard is sent to Gibraltar to get information from Admiral Barnwell, who it seems has refused to join the plot. Jiggs is sent to spy on General Scott. Back at the Pentagon office, General Scott catches Jiggs looking up El Paso on the map. The general fills Jiggs out on his opinions of the treaty and what they should do. He then gives him 72 hours leave and insists he take it immediately. Jiggs meets Senator Clark at Dulles Airport. Before Clark leaves, he asks Jiggs to go see Ellie and see if he can get any information on General Scott. Jiggs is sick with himself having to do that dirty work. While getting into his car, Jiggs sees Harold McPherson getting into General Scott's staff car. Jiggs and the Secret Service driver follow. In a dark alley by the Dobney Hotel, McPherson goes to meet Senator Prentice. General Scott is there and almost catches Jiggs in the parking garage. Thursday, May 15th. The president says he will not participate in the alert on Sunday and will be going to his private retreat at Blue Lake for some fishing. Scott calls Broderick at Site Y in El Paso. Senator Clark is in a small cafe outside Site Y. There's a girl, Colette Jackson, hanging around the cafe. She wonders why no men are coming from the base when planes are going in and out day and night. She says it's about 50 miles away. Senator Clark follows the instructions until he finds a dirt road to turn onto. A helicopter zooms in and lands by his car. Armed guards come out of the helicopter. Kind of an Area 51 experience. Gerard makes it to the aircraft carrier USS Kitty Hawk that Barnwell uses for his flagship. Gerard brings up betting, horse racing, and finally the Preakness. Gerard forces him to make a written statement about the plot. Jiggs shows up at Ellie's apartment unannounced. Ellie knows that Jiggs is not there to see her. Jiggs kisses her and she asks that he not complicate her life. He kisses her harder. Gerard leaves the flagship and phones that he has the confession. Gerard hides the note in a cigarette case that was given to him by the president. He then jumps a commercial jet out of Madrid. Back at Ellie's house, Jiggs gets Ellie to talk about her feelings for the general. She mentions that General Scott was a very careful man who never really cared about her. She tells him that he wrote her incriminating love letters. Jiggs picks up the letters while Ellie is out of the room. She walks in and catches him. She thinks Jiggs is doing this to help General Scott out. She is furious and says that Jiggs is always ready to clean the general's privy before she slaps him. Friday, May 16th. Secret Service shows a film to the president, Chris Todd, and Jiggs of Colonels Murdoch and Broderick reconning the president's home at Blue Lake. Todd is really taken by Ellie's letters, but Jiggs is still sensitive. The president stops the argument and commends Jiggs for doing the distasteful work. He says he believes they are on top of it, just as the secretary brings in the word that Gerard is dead as the plane has crashed. Senator Clark is being held at Site Y and calls Senator Prentice and is told that they were made aware of the base. Colonel Broderick opens a fifth of booze and leaves it in the locked room with the senator. Clark sees that Gerard has been killed in a plane crash and pours the hooch down the drain. A man from the U.S. Embassy goes to the crash site to look for evidence. The smashed cigarette case is laying on the ground, but it will take time to find it. Back at Site Y, there are 2 fresh bottles on the night table. Colonel Henderson comes in to see the senator. Clark tells Henderson about Jiggs not knowing about ECOMCON and that no references were in the Joint Chiefs of Staff's orders. Clark says he is going to tell, quote, the damnedest story you ever heard, unquote. Henderson decides to get the senator off the base, but Henderson is betrayed by one of Roderick's goose-steppers and the pair are stopped on the flight line by a sergeant. Henderson is driving a super cool track dune buggy with a 50 cal machine gun mounted on the top. Henderson beats the crap out of the sergeant and escapes. Saturday, May 17th. Henderson and the senator make it back to Dulles Airport in Washington just fine. Senator Clark steps into a phone booth. That's like an iPhone attached to the wall, and calls the White House. When he turns around, Henderson has vanished. The president finds out that Colonel Henderson is being held in the stockade at Fort Myers anonymously. The president contacts Admiral Barnswell. With the evidence presumably destroyed in the plane crash, Barnwell denies ever having signed a document. Chris Todd wants the president to fire the conspirators. The president lashes out that he has no proof. Senator Clark suggests that the president use the letters Jiggs obtained. The president doesn't want to go to the bottom of the barrel, even though he only has 24 hours left. Scott is back at his command center rehearsing takeover communications when another conspirator tells him that General Barney Rostowski has found out about the transport flights to unauthorized destination. They suspect that Rostowski will report directly to the president. Rostowski does report to the president, and he also lets him know that the next flight of transport has been changed from 7 a.m. on Sunday to 11 p.m. on Saturday. The president orders all of the transports to be grounded. The president orders General Scott to the White House. The 2 men meet without witnesses. The president confronts Scott with all the evidence about ECOMCON. The president demands the resignation of Scott and all of the other leading traitors. The 2 men verbally spar to no avail. The president gives a lecture on using the Constitution and not usurping power. The president pulls out the letters from Ellie, but decides not to use them. The president then demands the resignation of the officers, or he will announce it at a press conference in the morning. When General Scott walks out, he sees Jiggs and realizes that he has been working for the president. The general walks by without a word. The president gives Jiggs the letters to take back to Ellie. Sunday, May 18th. Scott has decided to record a broadcast that will be aired at 9 p.m. Sunday night. The other generals are starting to waver because the plan has fallen apart. Scott leaves for the studio so he can record his broadcast. The president interrupts the Preakness horse race to deliver his press conference. Secretary of Treasury Todd comes out and stops the press conference. Someone from the embassy in Madrid has arrived with a confession written by Admiral Barnswell. The president orders copies sent to General Scott and the others. When Jiggs gives the letter to General Scott, Scott calls him a night crawler and then demands to know if Jiggs knows who Judas was. Jiggs is ordered to answer and says Judas was, quote, a man I worked for and admired until he disgraced the 4 stars on his uniform, unquote. The press conference resumes and the president announces the request for resignation. At a television studio, Senator Prentice and Mr. McPherson are panicked by the president's announcements. Scott rudely dismisses the two. McPherson won't let him record his statement. Scott goes back to his headquarters and thinks the other generals will stand by him. But before Scott can get back, he sees that the 3 other generals have resigned. Scott gets in his staff car and asks to be taken home. Jig shows up at Ellie's house to give her back the letters. She asks if the letters were the bullets, and Jiggs replies that they might have been. Jiggs asks if he can see Ellie in the future. She agrees. The president says it is slander to say the U.S. cannot be strong without making war, and that peace is the best course. The movie ends showing the Constitution. World-famous short summary: boy has trouble asking a girl out. I hope you enjoyed today's show. I'm on just about all the social medias, but Twitter is my main place. You can find the links in the show notes. Remember, this show is completely free and independent. All I ask is you jump over to iTunes and give me a review. It really helps the show get found. Beware the Moors.